The Awakening. Chapter 1. A Door Between Worlds. Peter Hawthorne had always been an ordinary sort of lad. At 17, he was of middling height, with a shock of brown hair that refused any attempt at proper styling, and eyes that his mother called thoughtful, though his schoolmates deemed them merely distracted. He lived in a pleasant but unremarkable home on the outskirts of Oxford, where his father taught medieval literature at the university and his mother illustrated children's books. Their small cottage, with its garden full of old rose bushes and a single gnarled apple tree, sat just where the orderly streets of the town began to give way to the rolling countryside beyond. On this particular morning in late September, Peter awoke to a peculiar silence. The usual sounds of early day, birdsong, the distant rumble of cars along Woodstock Road, the soft footfalls of his mother preparing breakfast, were absent. He opened his eyes slowly, expecting to see the familiar sight of his bedroom ceiling with its network of old cracks that he had spent countless hours tracing with his eyes while thinking of other worlds and other times. Instead, he found himself staring up at an unfamiliar canopy of leaves, to which dappled sunlight fell upon his face. He blinked several times, certain he must still be dreaming, but the vision remained unchanged. Above him stretched the mighty branches of ancient trees, their leaves glimmering with a green so vibrant it seemed almost to glow from within. Peter sat up abruptly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was lying on a carpet of soft moss and fragrant pine needles, surrounded by a forest unlike any he had ever seen in England. The trees rose like pillars of a vast, living cathedral, their trunks broader than any oak he had known. Their bark was silvery gray, marked with whorls that seemed almost like script in some ancient tongue, and their leaves, some broad and flat, others needle-thin, whispered together in a breeze he could not feel at ground level. "I must be dreaming," Peter said aloud, his voice sounding small and foreign in the vastness of the forest. But the moss beneath his fingers felt too real, the scent of earth and growing things too distinct. He pinched his arm hard, wincing at the sharp pain. "Not dreaming, then," he muttered, rising unsteadily to his feet. He was still wearing what he had worn to bed, flannel pajama bottoms and an old t-shirt with the faded emblem of his school. His feet were bare, and he curled his toes against the cool softness of the moss. Looking around, he saw no sign of a path, no indication of which way he might go. The forest stretched in all directions, seemingly endless. "Hello?" he called out tentatively, then louder, "Hello? Is anyone there?" His only answer was the continued whispering of the leaves and, somewhere distant, the hollow knocking of what might have been a woodpecker. Peter turned slowly in place, searching for any hint of how he had come to be here, or how he might find his way home. As he completed his circle, he noticed something he had overlooked before, a stone. It was not a natural formation, but clearly shaped by hands, though whose hands, he could not guess. Standing about waist-high, it resembled an ancient milestone or boundary marker, roughly hewn but with clear intent. Upon its face were carved symbols unlike any Peter had seen before, reminiscent of the runes his father sometimes showed him in old manuscripts, yet distinctly different. As Peter approached the stone, he felt a curious sensation, as if the air around it were somehow thicker, more resistant to his passage. When he reached out to touch the weathered surface, his fingertips tingled as if brushing against static electricity. The symbols seemed to shift slightly under his gaze, never quite the same when he looked back at them. "Well," Peter said to himself, falling back on humor to mask his growing unease, "I don't think we're in Oxford anymore." A soft chuckle answered him from behind. Peter whirled around, nearly losing his balance on the uneven ground. Standing not 10 paces away was a figure that simultaneously confirmed all his suspicions of having left his own world behind and awakened every childhood fantasy he had ever entertained. The man, if man he was, stood a head taller than Peter, with a lean, strong frame draped in garments of muted green and brown. His face was fair and ageless, neither young nor old, with high cheekbones and eyes of such a deep gray they seemed almost silver in the dappled light. His hair, the color of burnished copper, was drawn back from his face, revealing ears that tapered to distinct points. "Indeed, you are far from Oxford, Peter Hawthorne," the stranger said, his voice melodious and accent unfamiliar. "Though perhaps not as far as distance might be measured in your world." Peter took an involuntary step backward. "You know my name," he said, stating the obvious in his shock. The stranger inclined his head slightly. I do. Just as I know that you are a dreamer of dreams, a reader of old tales, and that your heart has always yearned for lands beyond the borders of your own world. He approached with fluent grace. I am called Eldrin, in your tongue. I have been watching for your arrival these many days. My arrival? Peter echoed, bewilderment giving way to a mixture of fear and fascination. You expected me? But I don't understand how I came to be here at all, much less why anyone would be expecting me. Eldrin's expression grew grave. That is a tale that requires much telling, and this is not the place for it. He gestured around them. We stand now in the Whispering Wood, which marks the eastern boundary of Alvendor. It is not safe to linger here, especially for one newly come from the other lands. Peter glanced nervously at the silent trees surrounding them. Not safe? Why? The boundary between worlds is thin here, and things move between that should not. The stone you were examining is one of the ancient markers, placed here in ages past to warn travelers, and sometimes to guide them. Eldrin reached out, offering a slender hand. Tum. We must reach safer ground before nightfall. I will answer what questions I can as we journey. Peter hesitated only briefly before taking the offered hand. Eldrin's grip was firm and strangely warm, as if some inner fire burned just beneath his skin. I haven't any shoes, Peter said, suddenly self-conscious of his pajamas and bare feet. Eldrin smiled, reaching into a pouch at his belt. I have brought something that may serve, he said, producing what appeared to be 2 pieces of soft leather. These he unfolded to reveal simple moccasin-like shoes. They will not withstand a long journey, but they will protect your feet until we reach my dwelling. As Peter slipped on the surprisingly comfortable footwear, Eldrin removed his cloak and offered it to him. The day grows cool, and your garments are thin. Wrapped in the elven cloak, which was lighter than it appeared yet remarkably warm, Peter followed his strange guide deeper into the Whispering Wood. They walked in silence for a time, Peter's mind racing with questions, until at last he could contain himself no longer. You said you knew I was coming, he began. Tell. And why me? I'm nobody special. Eldrin slowed his pace slightly, looking back at Peter with those uncanny silver eyes. All who find their way to Alvendor are special in some fashion, though they may not know it themselves. As for how I knew, there are signs for those who can read them. The trees whisper differently when the veil between worlds grows thin. The stars shift in their courses. And there are prophecies, very old, that speak of those who will come in times of need. Prophecies about me? Peter asked incredulously. Perhaps not you specifically, Eldrin admitted, but about ones from the other lands who would cross over when darkness threatens to engulf Alvendor once more. He pointed to a break in the trees ahead. We will rest there briefly. The crossing can be taxing for those unaccustomed to it. The clearing was small but pleasant, centered around a bubbling spring that formed a clear pool before continuing as a small stream winding away into the forest. Eldrin gestured for Peter to sit upon a flat rock beside the water, then produced a small water skin and what appeared to be a packet wrapped in large leaves. Drink, he said, offering the water skin. The water of Alvendor will help restore your strength. The liquid inside was not water, or at least not entirely so. It tasted of summer berries and cool mountain streams, with a hint of something Peter couldn't identify, something like starlight, if starlight had a flavor. It flowed through him like liquid energy, easing an exhaustion he hadn't realized he felt. What is this? He asked, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. We call it silver dew, Eldrin replied, unwrapping the leaf packet to reveal what looked like thin wafers of a golden brown substance. It is gathered only at certain times, when the moons are full and the night dew collects the essence of the stars. He offered the wafers to Peter. Whey bread. It will sustain you far better than its appearance suggests. Peter took a bite and found the taste reminiscent of honey and nuts, with a subtle complexity that deepened as he chewed. One small piece seemed to fill him with a satisfying warmth that spread from his center to his limbs. As they ate, Peter studied his companion more closely. There was something timeless about Eldrin that defied Peter's understanding. He moved with a fluid grace that suggested both youth and the wisdom of centuries. His garments, which had at first appeared simple, revealed themselves upon closer inspection to be intricately crafted, with subtle patterns woven into the fabric itself. "You're not human, are you?" Peter asked finally, the question that had been forming since their first meeting. Eldrin's lips curved in a slight smile. "No, not as you would reckon it. My people have dwelt in Alvendor since before the first breaking of the world. We are called by many names in your legends: the fair folk, the shining ones, the elder race. Elvenkind, in the tongue of your fathers." "Elves," Peter breathed, the word both familiar and newly strange on his tongue. "Like in the old stories." "Your old stories hold more truth than your scholars would admit," Eldrin said. "The tales of faerie, of lands beyond the mist, of doors between worlds, all have their foundation in the passages between your realm and ours. In ages past, the crossing was made more frequently by those of both worlds. But as your people turned increasingly to iron and engines, the ways grew narrower, the crossings rarer." "Then how did I come here?" Peter asked. "I went to sleep in my bed and woke up in your forest. I didn't find any magic door or fairy ring." Eldrin's expression grew thoughtful. "The old ways of crossing have their own rules, not always comprehensible even to my kind. Some find their way through ancient portals, standing stones, certain crossroads, or trees that have grown in both worlds at once. Others are brought by guides, or by needs so great it thins the veil between worlds. And some," he fixed Peter with a penetrating gaze, "some are called." "Called? By whom?" "That remains to be seen." Eldrin rose smoothly to his feet. "We should continue. We have far to go before nightfall, and there are paths through these woods that even I would not walk after dark." As they resumed their journey, the forest began to change subtly around them. The trees grew less densely packed, allowing more light to filter through the canopy above. Peter noticed that Eldrin followed no visible path, yet moved with absolute certainty, occasionally stopping to listen to what seemed to be the forest itself. "Are there others like you?" Peter asked after a time. "Other elves, I mean." "Yes, though we are fewer than in ages past," Eldrin replied. "Many of my kindred have gone beyond, to the uttermost west, as the shadows lengthened in this world. Those who remain dwell in scattered enclaves, in the deep forests and hidden valleys where the old magic still runs strong." "And humans? Are there humans in this world too?" "Indeed. The realms of men lie mainly to the south and west of the Whispering Wood. The nearest is the kingdom of Ardenia, a week's journey from here if one follows the roads, though we shall not. The settlements of men are complicated places for my kind in these days." Peter considered this. "Is that where we're going? To this Ardenia?" "No," Eldrin said firmly. "I am taking you to my dwelling in the heart of the forest, where you will be safe while we determine why you have been brought to Alvendor. And perhaps, how to return you to your own world, if that is what you wish." "If that is what you wish." The words hung in the air between them. Did he wish to return? Peter had only been in this strange world for a matter of hours, yet already it had awakened something in him that had slumbered his entire life in England, a sense of belonging, of rightness that he had never known before. "I don't know," Peter admitted. "This is all so sudden, so strange. My parents will be worried sick." "Time flows differently between our worlds," Eldrin said gently. "A day here may be but moments there, or a year might pass in the turning of a season. It is one of the great mysteries of the crossing." This information both comforted and disturbed Peter. If time ran differently, perhaps his absence wouldn't cause the panic he feared, but it also meant he had no way of knowing how long he might truly be gone from home. As they walked, the forest continued to change character. The trees now stood farther apart, their trunks covered in luminous silver lichen that seemed to glow with a light of its own in the shadowed places. Strange flowers bloomed on the forest floor, some closing as they approached, others opening to reveal centers that shimmered like captured stars. "What are those?" Peter asked, pointing to a cluster of mushrooms that pulsed with a gentle blue light. "Moonshadow caps," Eldrin replied. "They grow where moonlight has pulled for 100 years or more. Their light guides the night travelers of the wood, the owl and the fox, the badger and the deer. And sometimes, he added with a meaningful glance at Peter, those who walked between worlds. They continued in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds their footfalls on the soft earth and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Peter found himself settling into the rhythm of the forest, his initial shock and fear giving way to a deep curiosity about this world he had somehow entered. It was as they crested a small rise that Peter first heard it, a sound like wind through summer leaves, but deeper, more resonant, with an undertone that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He stopped, turning his head to try to locate its source. "What is that sound?" he asked, voice hushed. Alvin had also halted, his posture suddenly alert, one hand moving to the long knife at his belt that Peter hadn't noticed before. "The trees," he said quietly. "They are warning us. Something approaches that should not be in this part of the wood." "The trees? Warning us?" Peter echoed, but even as he spoke, he could sense a change in the forest around them. The peaceful atmosphere had shifted, tension now vibrating in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. "Listen with more than your ears," Eldrin instructed, closing his eyes briefly. The whispering would earn its name honestly. Its trees are among the eldest in Alvendor, with roots that reach deep into the memory of the world. Peter tried to follow the instruction, closing his eyes and focusing on the sounds around him. Gradually, he became aware of patterns in what he had taken for random forest noise, rhythms and cadences that did indeed resemble speech, though in no language he could comprehend. When he opened his eyes again, Eldrin was watching him with something like approval. "Few from the other lands can hear the voices of the trees so quickly," he said. "It confirms what I suspected from the moment I found you by the boundary stone." "What's that?" Peter asked, still distracted by the growing urgency in the whispers around them. "That you have elvish blood in your lineage, however distant. It would explain much about how you came to be here." Eldrin's expression sharpened as he looked past Peter into the gathering shadows among the trees. "But such discussions must wait. We are being hunted." "Hunted?" Peter's voice rose in alarm. "By what?" "By those who serve the shadow," Eldrin replied grimly. "They have sensed your crossing and seek to prevent what they fear you may represent. Come, we must move swiftly now. My dwelling is not far, and its boundaries are warded against such creatures." They set off at a much faster pace, Eldrin leading Peter along what now seemed to be a definite path, though still unmarked by any visible signs. The whispers of the trees grew more insistent, and occasionally Peter thought he caught glimpses of movement from the corner of his eye, swift shadows flitting between distant trunks, gone when he turned to look directly. "What exactly is hunting us?" Peter gasped, struggling to keep up with Eldrin's tireless stride. "They are called Morwen in the old tongue," Eldrin replied without slowing. "Shadow wraiths, bound to the will of powers that should have been banished from Alvendor an age ago. They cannot abide direct sunlight, but as dusk approaches, they grow bolder." Peter glanced at the sky visible through breaks in the canopy and saw with dismay that the light was indeed fading. The sun must be nearing the horizon, though it was difficult to judge direction in the dense forest. A pang of fear shot through him. He had no weapon, no knowledge of this world or its dangers. If they were separated, he would be utterly lost. As if sensing his thoughts, Eldrin reached back and grasped Peter's wrist, pulling him forward. "Stay close. Whatever happens, do not stray from my side." They ran now, Peter's bare feet protected only by the thin leather moccasins as they dodged between trees and leapt over fallen logs. The forest floor dipped suddenly into a shallow ravine, at the bottom of which flowed a stream too wide to jump. Without hesitation, Eldrin led them into the water, which rose only to mid-calf but was icy cold. "The water will mask our scent and confuse our trail," Eldrin explained as they waded upstream. "The Morwen hunt by sense of essence more than sight." "My essence?" Peter panted, wincing as his feet found sharp stones beneath the clear water. "The vital energy that animates all living things. Yours shines brightly to those with eyes to see it, doubly so because you're not of this world. To the servants of shadow, you are a beacon in the dark." They continued along the stream for what felt to Peter like miles, though it was likely much less. His legs ached and his lungs burned with the effort, but fear drove him onward. Occasionally, Elgin would stop and listen, his head cocked like a bird's, before urging them forward again with increased urgency. It was during one such pause that Peter first heard it, a sound that belonged in no natural forest, a high, thin wailing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It raised gooseflesh on his arms and sent a chill of primal fear down his spine. "They have found our trail," Eldrin said grimly. "We must leave the water now. My dwelling lies just beyond the next rise." They clambered out of the stream onto a bank carpeted with ferns. As soon as they left the water, the wailing intensified, now joined by a second voice, then a third, forming a terrible chorus that seemed to echo inside Peter's skull. "Run!" Eldrin commanded, and Peter needed no further urging. They sprinted through the darkening forest, the last rays of sunlight slanting golden through the trees ahead. The wailing of the moorwind grew louder, closer, accompanied now by a sound like dry branches snapping underfoot, though far too rapid to be natural movement. "There." Eldrin pointed ahead to where the forest seemed to thin. "Beyond those silver birches lies the boundary of my realm. Once across, you will be safe for a time." With a final surge of desperate energy, Peter ran toward the line of pale trees that marked their destination. The wailing had reached a fevered pitch, and he could feel a cold presence at his back, like the chill that precedes a winter storm. Just as they reached the first of the silver birches, something snagged Peter's ankle. He fell forward with a cry, hitting the ground hard enough to drive the breath from his lungs. Looking back in terror, he saw not a physical hand but a tendril of living darkness wrapped around his leg, emanating from a shape that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the fading light, a void in the shape of a hooded figure, hovering just above the ground. "Eldrin." Peter gasped, scrabbling at the earth as the tendril began to pull him backward. The elf whirled, his knife flashing in his hand. With a word in a language Peter didn't understand, a word that seemed to ring like a bell in the gathering darkness, Eldrin slashed at the shadowy tendril. Where the blade passed, light briefly gloomed, and the darkness recoiled with a shriek of fury. Freed, Peter scrambled to his feet, but more shadow wraiths were emerging from between the trees behind them, their forms wavering like smoke but their intent unmistakable. Eldrin seized Peter's arm and all but threw him forward, past the line of silver birches. As soon as they crossed between the last two trees, a change came over the forest. The light seemed stronger here, golden and clear, though the sun must now be fully set. The air felt different too, cleaner, with a scent like spring rain and wildflowers. Most striking of all, the wailing of the moorwind stopped abruptly, as if cut off by an invisible wall. Peter turned back to see the shadow wraiths hovering at the line of birches, unable or unwilling to cross. They drifted back and forth like frustrated predators, their forms occasionally solidifying enough to reveal hooded figures with hands like twisted claws. "They cannot pass the wards," Eldrin said, though Peter noted he did not sheath his knife. "At least, not while their power remains as it is. But their master grows stronger, and the old boundaries may not hold forever." "Their master?" Peter asked, still trying to catch his breath. Eldrin's expression grew grim. "That is a tale for firelight and safety, not for the edge of night with wraiths at our backs. Come, my dwelling lies just ahead, and there we may speak more freely." They walked for perhaps another quarter mile through what appeared to be a managed wood. The trees here grew in a more orderly fashion, interspersed with small clearings where herbs and flowers grew in carefully tended beds. The path, now clearly visible, was lined with smooth white stones that gave off a subtle luminescence in the gathering darkness. At last, they rounded a bend and Peter stopped in wonder. Before them stood a dwelling unlike any he had seen before, part building, part living tree. It appeared that a circle of ancient oaks had grown together, their massive trunks fusing to form walls, their branches intertwining overhead to create a natural dome. Windows of what looked like crystal caught the last light of day, reflecting it in rainbow hues. A door of polished wood, inlaid with intricate patterns of silver, stood open in welcome. "This is a Filwan, my home," Eldrin said with quiet pride. "It means the Moonglade in the old tongue. Here you will be safe while we unravel the mystery of your coming to Alvendor." As they approached, soft light bloomed within the dwelling, spilling out onto the mossy ground before them. From inside came gentle music, as if small bells stirred by a breeze. The sound lifted Peter's spirits immediately, washing away some of the terror of their flight through the forest. "It's beautiful," Peter said simply, unable to find words adequate to express his awe. Eldrin smiled, the first full smile Peter had seen from him. "It has stood for 3,000 years of your world's time, and may stand 3,000 more, if the shadow does not prevail. Enter and be welcome, Peter Hawthorne of Oxford. For good or ill, your fate is now bound with that of Alvendor, and much may depend on the choices that lie before you." With these words, both comforting and unsettling, Eldrin led Peter into the warm light of Ithilwan, closing the silver-inlaid door firmly behind them against the gathering darkness outside. Chapter 2: The House of the Elf. The interior of Ithilwan was even more remarkable than its exterior. Peter found himself standing in a spacious chamber where floor, walls, and ceiling seemed to blend seamlessly with the living trees that formed the structure's foundation. The floor was polished wood, inlaid in places with patterns of lighter timber that seemed to shift subtly as he looked at them. The walls curved organically upward, the inner bark of the great oaks smoothed but not concealed, their natural whorls and ridges forming intricate designs more beautiful than any human craftsman could devise. Above, the branches of the trees spread in a natural dome, intertwining so densely that they formed a solid ceiling, yet leaving gaps precisely placed to allow shafts of light, or, now, moonlight, to penetrate at specific points. These beams illuminated the chamber like natural spotlights, supplemented by glowing crystals set in delicate silver sconces along the walls. The room was furnished sparsely but with obvious care. Low couches upholstered in fabric the color of moss and autumn leaves, tables that appeared to have grown from the floor rather than being placed upon it, shelves carved directly into the living wood of the walls, holding books, scrolls, and curious artifacts that Peter couldn't identify. "It's like something from a dream," Peter murmured, turning slowly to take in every detail. "Many dwellings of my kind were the inspiration for your world's tales of enchanted forests and fairy palaces," Eldrin said, moving to a graceful sideboard from which he took a crystal decanter. "Though few mortals have seen them in recent ages." He poured a clear liquid that sparkled like sunlight on water into 2 delicate glasses and offered one to Peter. "Drink. It will restore your strength after our flight from the Morwen." Peter sipped cautiously. The liquid was cool and refreshing, tasting of honey and wild berries with a hint of something he couldn't name, perhaps the essence of starlight itself. Warmth spread from his center to his limbs, easing the aches of their hasty journey. "This place, it feels alive," Peter said, noticing how the very air seemed to pulse gently around them, as if the house were breathing. "It is alive," Eldrin confirmed, settling onto one of the low couches and gesturing for Peter to do the same. "Ithilwan was not built as your houses are, but grown, coaxed from living trees over centuries, guided but never forced. The oaks offered themselves willingly to this purpose, and still they grow, though so slowly that you would not perceive it." Peter sat across from his host, still clutching the crystal glass like a talisman of normalcy in this extraordinary place. "You said we would be safe here." "The boundaries of my dwelling are warded with protections woven when the world was young," Eldrin nodded. "No servant of the shadow may cross them without invitation, though in these darkening days, even such ancient magics are not beyond challenge." He studied Peter thoughtfully. "But before we speak of dangers, you must be properly attired and fed. Your strange garments mark you too clearly as one from the other lands." As if summoned by his words, a side door opened, and another figure entered the chamber. Like Eldrin, this newcomer had the unmistakable features of the elder race, tall and graceful, with pointed ears and an ageless quality to their face. Unlike Eldrin, however, this elf was clearly female, with hair the pale gold of winter sunlight and eyes the deep blue of mountain lakes. She carried a bundle of folded clothing in her arms. "This is Lynn Ariel," Eldrin introduced her. "My kinswoman and keeper of Ithilwan when my duties take me beyond its bounds." The elf woman inclined her head slightly. "Be welcome, traveler from beyond," she said, her voice musical but with an undercurrent of caution. "Eldrin has sent word ahead of your coming. These garments may serve until proper attire can be crafted for you." She placed the bundle on a small table nearby. "Thank you," Peter said, suddenly self-conscious of his pajamas, which indeed seemed utterly out of place in these elegant surroundings. Linnariel's expression remained neutral, but Peter sensed a certain reservation in her manner. "I will prepare a meal," she said to Eldrin in a tone that suggested they had more to discuss privately. With another slight nod to Peter, she withdrew through the same door. "She doesn't trust me," Peter observed once she had gone. Eldrin sighed. "It is not you she mistrusts, but the change you represent. My kind have long memories, Peter Hawthorne. The last time one crossed from the other lands, things did not end well for Alvendor." Peter swallowed hard. "What happened?" "That is a tale for another time," Eldrin said firmly. "First, you should change your garments and take food. Then we will speak of why you may have been brought to us, and what it might portend." The clothing Linnariel had provided proved to be simple but well-made, soft leggings of a material similar to suede but more supple, a linen shirt of pale green, and a tunic of deeper forest green, embroidered subtly a collar and cuffs with patterns of leaves and vines. Soft leather boots completed the ensemble. Everything fit as if made for him, though Peter suspected they were standard garments kept for guests rather than specifically crafted for his arrival. When Peter emerged from the small antechamber where he had changed, he found a table had been set in the main room with a simple but appetizing meal: bread that smelled of honey, cheese of several varieties, fruits he recognized and others he did not, and a steaming soup in bowls of what appeared to be polished wood but felt like ceramic to the touch. Linnariel had returned and now sat beside Eldrin at the table. She gestured for Peter to join them, her manner still reserved but perhaps slightly warmer than before. As they ate, the food more delicious than its simple appearance suggested, Peter felt some of the tension of the day's events begin to ease from his shoulders. "Now," Eldrin said once they had finished the meal, "we must speak of serious matters. Your arrival in Alvendor is no mere chance, Peter Hawthorne. The boundaries between worlds do not thin without cause, nor do those of the other lands cross over without purpose, whether known to them or not." "You keep saying that," Peter said, leaning forward. "That I must have some purpose here. But I'm just an ordinary boy from Oxford. There's nothing special about me." Linnariel and Eldrin exchanged glances. "That is not entirely true," Linnariel said, speaking directly to Peter for the first time since her initial greeting. "Eldrin tells me you heard the voices of the trees in the Whispering Wood." I'm not sure what I heard," Peter admitted. "It was just whispers, patterns in the wind." "Even to hear that much on your first day in Alvendor marks you as exceptional," she said. "Most from the other lands, even those few who have crossed in recent ages, hear nothing but wind and leaves, even after months among us. It suggests bloodlines mingled in some forgotten generation," Eldrin added. "Some ancestor of yours may have had elvish blood, or perhaps came from Alvendor originally." Peter shook his head in disbelief. "That's impossible. My family is thoroughly, boringly English. Generations of teachers and shopkeepers and the occasional vicar. Nothing magical or otherworldly about us." "Are you certain?" Eldrin pressed. "Have you never felt different from those around you? Never sensed things others could not? Never dreamed of places like Alvendor with such clarity that waking seemed the true dream?" Peter fell silent, struck by the accuracy of Eldrin's words. All his life, he had indeed felt somehow apart from his peers, driven to spend hours in forests and fields when others preferred shopping centers and football pitches. His dreams had always been vivid, often set in landscapes not unlike the one in which he now found himself. And sometimes, in the quiet of deep night or the hush of dawn, he had sensed something just beyond normal perception. "Perhaps," he conceded reluctantly. "But that hardly makes me some prophesied savior from another world." "The prophecies speak not of saviors but of catalysts," Linnariel said quietly. "Those whose coming marks the turning of an age, for good or ill." "What prophecies, exactly?" Peter asked, a chill running down his spine despite the warmth of the room. Eldrin rose and moved to one of the shelves embedded in the living wall. From it, he took what appeared to be a scroll case made of silver filigree over dark wood. This he brought back to the table, opening it carefully to extract a roll of parchment so ancient it had turned the color of old ivory. "This is one of the 7 scrolls of Ithranol," written by the greatest seer of the elder days, Elgin explained, unrolling the document with reverent care. It has many passages concerning the future of Alvendor, most written in metaphor and riddle as is the way of true prophecy. But this section speaks with unusual clarity. He indicated a paragraph written in flowing script unlike any Peter had seen before. The letters seemed to shimmer slightly on the page, as if reluctant to be fixed in any one form. "I cannot read that," Peter said. "What language is it?" "High Elvish, from before the Sundering," Linnariel replied. "Few even among our kind can still read it fluently. Eldrin is one of the last lore masters to have mastered the ancient tongue." Eldrin studied the text for a moment, then recited, "When shadow rises once more from the depths, when the forgotten crown is sought by unworthy hands, then shall come one from the world beyond the veil, child of two realms though they know it not. By their hands shall the scales tip toward light or dark, and by their choice shall Alvendor stand or fall." A heavy silence fell after he finished speaking. Peter stared at the ancient scroll, its incomprehensible text somehow more menacing now that he knew what it contained. "That's very dramatic," he said finally, attempting to mask his unease with humor, "but it could mean anyone. Surely others have crossed between worlds before me." "They have," Alvin acknowledged, carefully rolling the scroll and returning it to its case. "But not in 500 years, and not through the Whispering Wood, which has been closed to passage since the last breaking of the world." "The last what?" "The breaking of the world," Linnariel repeated. "When the realms of men and elvenkind were sundered more completely than ever before, the ways between narrow to mere cracks, passable only at certain times and places, and even then, not without great cost." Peter leaned back in his chair, feeling overwhelmed. "So you think on this, child of two realms? That I'm here to tip some cosmic scales?" "We think the possibility cannot be dismissed," Eldrin said carefully. "Especially given the timing of your arrival." "What do you mean?" Eldrin's expression grew grave. The Morwen have been growing bolder, venturing from their ancient haunts in the deep hollows. Dark creatures that have slept for centuries now stir in the wild places. And there are rumors, still unconfirmed, that the Tower of Nargith has shown lights in its uppermost chamber for the first time since the Great War. "The Tower of Nargith?" Peter echoed. "Once the seat of learning for both elvenkind and men," Linnariel explained. "Later corrupted by the one we do not name, who turned its purpose from wisdom to domination. It was abandoned after his defeat, deemed too tainted by darkness to be reclaimed. And now there are lights there," Peter said slowly. "I'm guessing that's bad news." "He would suggest that someone, or something, has taken residence in a place steeped in ancient evil," Eldrin confirmed. "And the timing, so close to your arrival." "Coincidence," Peter suggested, though without much conviction. "My people do not believe in coincidence," Linnariel said softly. "All threads in the great tapestry are connected, whether we can trace their pattern or not." Peter rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. This was too much to absorb at once: magical forests, prophecies, ancient evils stirring. Just that morning, his greatest concern had been an unfinished history essay due at school. "Let's say, just for argument's sake, that I am this prophesied person," he said. "What exactly am I supposed to do? I don't have any special powers or knowledge. I don't even know how I got here, let alone how I'm meant to save an entire world." "The prophecy does not specify that you will save Alvendor," Elgin reminded him gently. "Only that by your choices, its fate will be determined. And as for what you are to do, that is what we must discover together." "But where do we even start?" Peter asked, frustration edging his voice. "With knowledge," Eldrin said firmly. "Tomorrow, I will begin teaching you the history of Alvendor, its peoples, and its magics. You must understand this world if you are to find your place in it, whether that place is as fulfiller of prophecy or merely as a visitor who will eventually return home." "And if I want to return home now?" Peter asked, though he was surprised to find the question held less urgency than it might have hours earlier. Linnariel and Eldrin exchanged glances again. "The ways between worlds are not easily traversed, even for those with the knowledge to find them," Linnariel said. "And they open only at certain times, under certain conditions. The boundary stone where you appeared marks one such crossing point," Eldrin added, but it will not function again until the next alignment of the moons, 28 days hence. A month, Peter translated. I'm stuck here for at least a month. It would seem so, Aldrin agreed. Unless another way presents itself. But that time need not be wasted. There is much you can learn that may serve you well, whether your destiny lies in Alvendor or in your own world. Peter sighed, accepting the inevitable. All right then. I suppose I'm your student until the moons align or whatever. You should rest now, Lynn Ariel said, rising gracefully from her seat. The crossing between worlds takes a toll on body and spirit alike, and you have had a trying day even beyond that. She led Peter to another door, which opened onto a small but comfortable chamber. Like the main room, it seemed to have been grown rather than built, its walls the living wood of the great oaks. A bed with a frame of intricately carved wood stood against one wall, covered in linens of soft green and silver. A small window of crystal looked out into the night forest, now illuminated by what appeared to be two moons, one silver-white, the other with a subtle golden hue. 2 moons, Peter murmured, moving to the window. I really am in another world. The silver sister and the golden brother, we call them, Lynn Ariel said, following his gaze. When both are full, as they near now, the power in Alvendor runs strongest, for good or ill. She turned to leave but paused at the threshold. Peter Hawthorne, she said, her voice softer than before, whatever your purpose here, know that you are not alone in facing it. The elder race may be diminished from our ancient glory, but we have not forgotten our oaths to protect Alvendor and all who dwell within it, including those who come from beyond its borders. With these words, she departed, leaving Peter alone with his thoughts and the gentle light of the twin moons streaming through the crystal window. Despite his exhaustion, sleep did not come easily. Peter lay awake for hours, his mind racing with all he had learned. Elvish blood in his lineage? A prophecy about his coming? Ancient evil stirring at the precise moment of his arrival? It seemed too fantastic to be real, yet the solid wood beneath him and the moonlight on his face were undeniable evidence that he was indeed in Alvendor. When sleep finally claimed him, his dreams were vivid and disturbing, shadows pursuing him through endless forests, a tower of black stone gleaming under twin moons, and a crown of twisted metal that seemed to whisper his name. He awoke to sunlight and birdsong. For a disorienting moment, he expected to see his bedroom ceiling with its familiar cracks, but reality quickly reasserted itself. The wooden walls of his chamber in Ithilwan, the crystal window now admitting golden morning light, the unfamiliar yet comfortable bed in which he lay. Peter dressed in the elvish garments provided, finding them more comfortable than they had appeared. The fabric moved with him like a second skin, lighter than any clothing he'd worn in England yet somehow warmer. The boots, in particular, seemed to mold themselves to his feet, supporting without constraining. When he emerged from his chamber, he found Elton waiting in the main room, seated at a table now laid with breakfast, fruits, bread, and what appeared to be honey but glowed with an inner light. You slept deeply, Aldrin observed as Peter joined him. The transition between worlds often brings exhaustion. I had strange dreams, Peter admitted, helping himself to a piece of the bread. It tasted of nuts and spices he couldn't identify. Dreams have power in Alvendor, Eldrin said seriously. More than in your world. They can be mere reflections of waking fears, but they can also be glimpses of what is, what has been, or what may yet come to pass. What did you see? Peter described his dreams, the pursuing shadows, the black tower, the whispering crown. With each detail, Eldrin's expression grew more concerned. The Tower of Nargith, he said when Peter finished. You have seen it, though you have never laid eyes upon it in the waking world. And the crown, that is troubling indeed. Why? What is it? Eldrin hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. It is called the Circlet of Shadows, forged in the depths of the dark days by the one whose name we do not speak. It was his instrument of power and corruption, allowing him to bend others to his will and pervert the natural magics of Alvendor to his purpose. What happened to it? Peter asked, his appetite suddenly diminished. After his defeat, the circlet was broken into 7 fragments and scattered throughout Alvendor, each piece hidden in a place of power guarded by ancient enchantments. It was believed that without the circlet whole, he could never return to full strength, even if his spirit endured. And now someone's trying to put it back together, Peter guessed. That's what the lights in the tower mean. Eldrin nodded grimly. It would explain much of what we have observed, the growing boldness of creatures that should fear the light, the disturbances in the deep places of the world, the unease that has fallen even upon the most peaceful forests. But what does it have to do with me? Peter asked. Why would I dream of this crown? That I cannot say with certainty, Eldrin replied. But the prophecy speaks of one from beyond the veil coming when the forgotten crown is sought by unworthy hands. It suggests a connection between your arrival and these events. Peter pushed his plate away, suddenly feeling the weight of expectations he hadn't asked for. I'm not a hero, Eldrin. I'm not a warrior or a wizard. I'm just me. Heroes rarely begin their journeys recognizing themselves as such, Eldrin said gently. And the greatest among them are often those who never sought the role but accepted it when necessity demanded. So what now? Peter asked, resigned to at least hearing what might be expected of him. Now, as I promised yesterday, we begin your education, Eldrin said, rising from the table. Before you can understand your place in Alvendor's present, you must learn of its past. He led Peter to another part of Ithilwan, a chamber that appeared to serve as a study or library. Unlike human libraries with their rows of shelves, this room held its knowledge in many forms. Traditional books bound in materials Peter couldn't identify, scrolls stored in cases of wood, metal, and crystal, strange devices that resembled astrolabes but far more complex, and, most surprisingly, what appeared to be living plants growing in patterns that somehow conveyed information to those who knew how to read them. Eldrin gestured to a comfortable chair beside a small table on which lay a large book bound in green leather. This is the Annals of Alvendor, written in the common tongue that evolved after men and elves began to share these lands. It contains the history of this world from the awakening to the last breaking of the world. Peter settled into the chair, eyeing the massive tome with some trepidation. This looks like it might take more than a month to read. You need not read it all, Eldrin assured him with a smile. I have marked the passages most relevant to understanding our present circumstances. And I will be here to answer questions and fill in gaps as needed. For the remainder of that day and many days that followed, Peter immersed himself in the history and lore of Alvendor. He learned of the awakening, when the world first took form from the dreams of powers beyond mortal comprehension, of the coming of the Elder Race, who shaped much of the land's beauty, of the later arrival of men, and the Golden Age when both races worked together to create wonders now largely lost. And he learned of the dark days, when one of the greatest of the Elder Race turned from light to shadow, seeking dominion rather than harmony. Taking the name Morghast, which meant Death's Shadow, in the Old Tongue, he had forged the Circlet of Shadows and used its power to corrupt many to his cause, elves, men, and creatures that had once been peaceful guardians of wild places. The war that followed had cost both races dearly. In the final battle, Morghast had been defeated, his physical form destroyed, though some whispered his spirit had endured, bound to the circlet he had created. The decision to break the circlet into 7 pieces and hide them throughout Alvendor had been controversial, with some arguing it should have been destroyed completely. But the Elder Ones had maintained that its destruction might have unforeseen consequences, perhaps even releasing Morghast's spirit to find another vessel. And now someone seeks to reassemble it, Peter said on the evening of the 3rd day, closing the annals with a sigh. To what end? To bring back Morghast? Perhaps, Eldrin said, looking troubled. Or perhaps to claim its power for themselves. Either outcome would be disastrous for Alvendor. They were sitting in the main chamber of Ithilwan, the light of the twin moons, now nearly full, streaming through the crystal windows. Lynn Ariel had been absent for much of Peter's time there, attending to what Eldrin had vaguely described as matters of our kindred, but she had returned that evening, bringing news that had left both elves visibly concerned. Tell him, she said to Eldrin now, her melodious voice tight with tension. He has a right to know, if the prophecy speaks truly. Eldrin nodded gravely. There have been sightings of Morwen far from their usual haunts, not just in the Whispering Wood where we encountered them, but in the foothills of the Silver Peaks and even near the borders of human settlements. And worse, there are reports of other creatures serving the shadow, wolf riders in the northern plains, fell birds that spy from above, and most troubling of all, at least one dragon stirring in the depths of Mount Durakar. Dragons? Peter echoed, the word sending a chill through him despite the warmth of the room. They're real here? Real, but few, Lineariel said. Most departed Alvendor ages ago, seeking lands beyond even our knowledge. Those that remained retreated to the deepest mountains, sleeping the long sleep of their kind. For one to wake now. It suggests a calling, Aldrin finished. A summoning by power great enough to reach into dragon dreams. Peter looked between them, seeing the gravity in their ageless faces. The circlet, he said. Even broken into pieces, it has that kind of power. Each fragment retains a measure of the whole, Aldrin confirmed. And if even one piece has been recovered by servants of the shadow, it could be used to call to those already inclined toward darkness. Then we have to stop them, Peter said with more confidence than he felt. Before they can gather all the pieces. We? Lineariel raised an eyebrow. You speak as if you have decided to involve yourself in Alvendor's fate. Peter hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Had he decided? Part of him still hoped this was all an elaborate dream from which he would soon awaken in his bed in Oxford. Another part, growing stronger each day, felt drawn to this world and its plight in ways he couldn't explain. I don't know what I can do to help, he admitted. But if there's even a chance the prophecy is right, that my choices will affect what happens here, I can't just sit back and do nothing. Aldrin and Lineariel exchanged one of their speaking glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then perhaps it is time for the next stage of your education, Aldrin said. Tomorrow, we begin your training in the practical arts of Alvendor, not just its history and lore, but its magics and methods of survival. For if you are to play a role in what comes, you must have more than knowledge. You must have skills. Magic? Peter repeated, both intrigued and skeptical. You think I can learn magic? All beings have some capacity for the art, Lineariel said. Though it manifests differently according to one's nature and lineage. If you indeed have elder blood, however distant, you may have more aptitude than most from the other lands. And if I don't? Peter asked. Then we shall discover what talents you do possess, Aldrin said firmly. Every creature has gifts uniquely their own. It is merely a matter of finding yours. With this both promise and challenge ringing in his ears, Peter retired to his chamber, his mind too full of all he had learned to find sleep quickly. When it finally came, his dreams were once again filled with visions of the Black Tower and the Broken Crown, but this time, he also glimpsed a figure climbing the tower steps, face hidden in shadow but somehow familiar, as if he should know them from somewhere in his past. He awoke before dawn, the twin moons still visible through his window, now so close to fullness that their combined light cast shadows nearly as sharp as daylight. Something had changed during the night, a decision made perhaps in the depths of his dreaming mind. Whatever his purpose in Alvendor, whatever role the prophecy had cast him in, he would meet it head-on rather than retreat from it. Peter Hawthorne of Oxford would discover what it meant to be child of two realms, even if that discovery led him into darkness. Chapter 3, Lessons in Magic and Shadow. The days that followed transformed Peter in ways he could never have imagined when he first awakened in the Whispering Wood. Under Elvin's patient tutelage, he began to learn the basics of Alvendorian magic, though magic was not the word the elves used for it. We call it _Thyras _, Aldrin explained as they sat in a small clearing behind a Filwyn, the morning dew still glistening on the grass around them. It translates roughly to the speaking with essence. All things in Alvendor have an essence, a fundamental nature that can be perceived and, with practice, influenced by those with the skill. Like talking to trees? Peter asked, remembering the whispers he had heard in the Whispering Wood. That is one manifestation, Aldrin nodded. The trees are among the easiest for beginners to perceive, as their essence is slow-moving and strong. But in time, one can learn to speak with stone and stream, with air and flame, even with creatures both great and small. And you think I can learn this? You have already begun, Aldrin reminded him. You heard the tree's warning without training. That suggests an innate aptitude. For that first lesson, Aldrin had Peter sit in perfect stillness, eyes closed, focusing only on his breathing and the sounds of the forest around them. It was harder than it seemed. Peter's mind kept wandering to thoughts of home, of the prophecy, of the dangers Eldrin had described. Each time, the elf would gently guide him back to awareness of the present moment. The foundation of _Athira's_ is presence, Eldrin said. One cannot speak with the essence of the world while the mind chatters like a squirrel. After what felt like hours of these exercises, Eldrin finally directed Peter to open his eyes and focus on a small sapling at the edge of the clearing. Do not merely look at its outer form, he instructed. Try to perceive the life force flowing within it, the slow pulse of sap rising from roots to branches, the quiet consciousness that is unlike our own but no less real. Peter stared at the sapling until his eyes watered, seeing nothing but a young tree swaying slightly in the breeze. He was about to admit defeat when something shifted in his perception, not in his eyes, but somewhere deeper. For just a moment, he glimpsed what seemed like a soft glow emanating from the sapling, pulsing in rhythm with something he felt rather than heard. I saw something, he said hesitantly. A light, but not light exactly. And I felt a kind of beat, like a very slow heart. Eldrin smiled, genuine pleasure in his ageless eyes. God. That is the beginning. With practice, you will learn to hold that perception longer, to deepen it, and eventually to communicate through it. The lessons continued daily, sometimes with Eldrin, sometimes with Linearial, who proved to be a stricter but equally effective teacher. In addition to _Athira's_, they taught him the basics of survival in Alvendor's wilds, which plants were safe to eat and which deadly, how to move silently through forest and field, how to read the messages left in broken twigs and disturbed earth by those who had passed before. He learned to use a bow, a simple one at first, sized for his height and strength, then gradually more complex models as his skill improved. Eldrin also taught him the rudiments of swordplay, using light wooden practice blades that nonetheless left Peter bruised and aching after each session. The servants of Shadow will not wait for you to be ready, the elf said when Peter complained of the pace. They will strike when they perceive advantage, and you must be prepared to defend yourself. As the days passed, Peter found himself changing in subtle ways. His body, always reasonably fit from school sports, became leaner and stronger. His senses seemed sharper. He could hear movements in the forest at greater distances, distinguish more subtle scents on the wind. Most notably, his perception of _Athira's_ grew stronger, until he could not only see the essence light of plants and trees but maintain that awareness for longer periods. On the 12th day after his arrival, he achieved his first true communication. They were working in the clearing as usual, Peter focusing on a cluster of wildflowers, trying to sense not just their essence but their simple consciousness. Remember, Eldrin coached from nearby, do not impose your thoughts upon them. Their awareness is not like ours. Seek the common ground between your essences. Peter stared at the delicate blue blossoms, holding the perception of their essence light steady. Instead of trying to form words or images as he had been attempting, he simply opened his awareness to them, inviting rather than demanding. To his astonishment, he received an impression, not words, but a complex sensation that somehow conveyed meaning, joy in sunlight, roots drinking deep, air movement pleasure. The flowers were communicating their experience of the morning, in their own wordless way. I felt them, he whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might break the tenuous connection. They're happy. The sun feels good to them, and there was rain in the night that's still dampening the soil. Eldrin's hand came to rest lightly on his shoulder. Well done, he said softly. You have made your first true speaking with. It will become easier with practice, and in time, you may learn to communicate more complex ideas, even to plants such as these. That night, Linearial prepared a special meal to mark Peter's progress, a gesture that suggested she had begun to accept him as more than just a potentially dangerous outsider. As they ate, Eldrin announced that it was time to expand Peter's education beyond the boundaries of Athilwan. You have learned much, but there is more to Alvendor than can be seen from the safety of this glade, he said. Tomorrow, we will journey to one of the ancient sites of power, a place where you may develop your skills further, and perhaps gain insight into your purpose here. Is it safe to lead the wards? Peter asked, remembering the Morwen that had pursued them on his first day. Nothing in Alvendor is entirely safe in these darkening days, Linearial answered frankly. but you cannot fulfill any destiny while hiding behind our protections. And Eldrin is among the greatest warriors of our kind still dwelling on these shores. You will be as safe as anyone can be." Peter nodded, both apprehensive and eager. Despite the comfort and beauty of Ithilwan, he had begun to feel restless, curious about the wider world in which he had found himself. And there was another feeling, one he barely acknowledged even to himself, a growing sense of responsibility toward Alvendor and its fate. They set out at dawn the next day, Eldrin equipped with a bow of polished yew and a long knife at his belt, Peter carrying a smaller bow and a short sword that felt awkward at his hip. Both wore cloaks of a material that seemed to shift its hue subtly to match their surroundings. Lynn Ariel saw them off at the boundary of Ithilwan's wards, her final words both blessing and warning. "May the light of the two siblings guide your path," she said, referring to the twin moons, now just past their full phase. "And remember, Peter Hawthorne, in Alvendor, not all is as it seems. Trust your new senses as much as your eyes." Their journey took them eastward, away from the Whispering Wood and toward what Eldrin called the Vale of Echoes. They traveled swiftly but cautiously, Eldrin constantly alert for signs of danger. Peter was surprised to find that he could keep pace with the elf more easily than he would have imagined possible 2 weeks earlier, another sign of how his body was adapting to Alvendor. As they walked, Eldrin continued Peter's education, now focusing on the political landscape of the world he had entered. "The realms of men lie mainly to the west and south," he explained. "Ardenia is the largest kingdom, ruled by the line of Theron for 20 generations of men. Then there is Caldara to the south, smaller but wealthy from trade, and the Northmark, which is less a kingdom than a loose alliance of frontier settlements." "And the elves?" Peter asked. "You and Lynn Ariel can't be the only ones. We are not, though our numbers have dwindled. The greatest concentration of my kind now dwells in Elandvale, the hidden valley beyond the Silver Peaks. Others live in scattered enclaves throughout Alvendor, some in isolation, others maintaining cautious relations with the societies of men." "Why cautious?" Eldrin's expression grew somber. "The relations between our peoples have cooled since the last breaking of the world. Many men now view the elder race with suspicion, blaming us for calamities that were beyond anyone's control. And some of my kind have responded by withdrawing further from engagement with the younger races, deeming them too short-sighted and quick to anger." "That sounds familiar," Peter observed. "People often fear or resent what they don't understand, where I come from." "The worlds are not so different in that regard," Eldrin agreed. "Though here, such divisions can have more immediate consequences, as they weaken the alliance that once stood against the shadow." They made camp that night in a small hollow surrounded by ancient oaks, Eldrin creating a fire so small and smokeless that it seemed more like a cluster of glowing embers. After a simple meal of whey bread and dried fruits, they sat watching the twin moons rise over the eastern horizon. "Tell me about the breaking of the world," Peter said, finally voicing a question that had been forming since his first lessons in Alvendorian history. The books mentioned it several times, but never explained exactly what happened. Eldrin was silent for a long moment, his ageless face grave in the faint firelight. "It is not a tale easily told," he said at last. "Or easily heard. But perhaps you should know it, as it bears on our present circumstances." He stared into the glowing embers as he began to speak, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that reminded Peter of the ancient poets his father sometimes read aloud. "After the defeat of Morghast and the breaking of the Circlet, there was peace in Alvendor for many generations of men, nearly 1,000 years by your reckoning. The kingdoms of men flourished, and the elder race, though diminished by the losses of the war, continued to dwell in harmony with the land. But peace bred complacency, and complacency bred forgetting. Gradually, the vigilance established after Morghast's defeat eroded. The 7 fragments of the Circlet, each guarded originally by a council comprising both elvenkind and men, became instead the exclusive province of one race or the other as cooperation faded. And then came Viridian." Eldrin paused, his expression darkening further. "He was of mixed blood, half elven, half human, born in Ardenia but raised in Elandvale after his human mother died. Brilliant and charming, he moved easily between both societies, gaining influence in each. Few recognized the ambition that drove him, the hunger for recognition that festered in his heart. Using his unique position, Viridian gained access to ancient lore that should have remained sealed, texts from before Morghast's time that spoke of the forging of the circlet and hinted at its powers. He became obsessed with the idea of claiming that power, not for evil as Morghast had done, but supposedly to unite the sundered peoples under one wise rule, his own. Over decades, he located 3 of the 7 fragments and managed to join them together. Even this partial restoration of the circlet granted him terrible power, enough to bend weak minds to his will and to corrupt the natural magics of the land in certain places. When his plans were discovered, both elves and men moved against him, but too late. Cornered in the Tower of Nargotha, which he had claimed as his stronghold, Viridian attempted a ritual to locate the remaining 4 fragments through their resonance with those he already possessed. The ritual failed catastrophically. The power he channeled was too great, too primal for his control. It tore through the fabric of Alvendor itself, creating a magical cataclysm that reshaped portions of the land, destroyed 2 of the ancient cities of men, and worst of all, drastically narrowed the ways between worlds. Many who had the ability to cross between Alvendor and other realms found themselves suddenly trapped on one side or the other. Knowledge was lost, connection severed. Eldrin fell silent, the tale clearly weighing heavily upon him. Peter waited a moment before asking, what happened to Viridian? And the 3 fragments he had joined? Viridian perished in the cataclysm, his physical form consumed by the very forces he sought to control. The 3 joined fragments were separated once more in the magical backlash and scattered to new locations, unknown to any living being. Since that day, the breaking of the world has stood as a grim reminder of the dangers of seeking power beyond one's understanding, and of the consequences when the guardianship of dangerous artifacts fails. And now someone's trying again, Peter said softly. So it would seem, Eldrin agreed. Though who it might be, we do not yet know. None with Viridian's unique position between our peoples has arisen in the 5 centuries since the breaking. They fell into contemplative silence, the only sounds the soft crackling of the dying embers and the night chorus of insects. Peter felt the weight of Alvendor's troubled history settling on his shoulders, along with a growing sense of the responsibility the prophecy had placed upon him, willing or not. We should rest, Eldrin said finally. Tomorrow we enter the Vale of Echoes, and you will need your wits about you there. Peter slept fitfully that night, his dreams once again filled with visions of the Black Tower. This time, however, he saw more clearly the figure climbing its winding stair, tall and graceful like an elf, but with something of human determination in their stance. The face remained in shadow, but Peter sensed a terrible purpose driving them upward, toward a chamber where a fragment of twisted metal gleamed with malevolent light. He awoke with a gasp just before dawn, the dream still vivid in his mind. Eldrin, already alert and watching the lightning eastern sky, glanced at him with concern. Another vision? The elf asked quietly. Peter nodded, describing what he had seen. Eldrin listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Your dreams continue to align with our fears, he said when Peter had finished. Someone indeed seeks the fragments of the circlet, and your vision suggests they may already have located one. We must make haste to the Vale of Echoes. It may offer insight that we sorely need. They broke camp quickly and continued their journey as the sun rose, now moving at a faster pace that left little breath for conversation. The landscape gradually changed around them, the mixed forest giving way to rolling hills covered in tall grasses that whispered in the breeze. By midday, they could see in the distance a line of standing stones atop a ridge, silhouetted against the sky. The guardians of the Vale, Eldrin said, pointing toward the megalithic formation. Raised by the elder race in the days before men came to Alvendor. They marked the boundary of a place of great power and potential danger. As they drew closer to the standing stones, Peter began to feel a curious sensation, a subtle vibration that seemed to pass through the ground into his body, accompanied by a faint ringing in his ears. He mentioned this to Eldrin, who nodded with satisfaction. You are sensing the ephyras of the Vale already, he confirmed. It is stronger here than in most places in Alvendor, one of the reasons we have journeyed to this site. The Vale of Echoes will amplify your developing abilities, allowing you to perceive and perhaps communicate with essences that might otherwise remain beyond your reach. They reached the standing stones by mid-afternoon. Up close, Peter could see that they were not the rough megaliths they had appeared from a distance, but intricately carved pillars, each bearing symbols similar to those he had seen on the boundary stone where he had first awakened in Alvendor. 12 in total, they formed a perfect circle atop the ridge. Eldrin led Peter to the center of the stone circle, where a flat altar-like rock bore a depression shaped like a cupped hand. The elf produced a small crystal vial from within his tunic and poured clear water into the depression. "This is one of the ancient ritual sites of the Elder race," he explained. "The water serves as a focus for the Ephyras that flows abundantly here. Look into it and open your awareness as you have been practicing. The veil may have wisdom to offer." Peter knelt beside the stone altar, feeling the vibration in the ground growing stronger beneath his knees. The water in the depression was perfectly still despite the breeze that moved the grasses around them. As he stared into its depths, focusing his awareness as Eldrin had taught him, the ringing in his ears intensified, resolving gradually into something that resembled voices, dozens, perhaps hundreds of them, all speaking at once just below the threshold of comprehension. "I hear voices," he whispered, afraid to break his concentration. "But I can't make out what they're saying." "The echoes for which the veil is named," Eldrin said softly. "They are the resonances of all who have communed with this place over thousands of years. Focus on your question, the purpose that brought you here, and the relevant voices may become clearer." Peter frowned in concentration, directing his thoughts toward the mystery of his arrival in Alvendor and the prophecy that Eldrin believed referred to him. "Why am I here? He asked silently. "What am I meant to do? The cacophony of voices shifted, most fading to a background murmur while a few grew stronger. Peter still couldn't distinguish words, but impressions began to form in his mind, a sense of urgency, of time running short, an image of the boundary stone where he had awakened, a feeling of connection to something, or someone, he had yet to encounter. And then, cutting through these more nebulous impressions, a single voice became momentarily clear, speaking words that seemed to resonate within Peter's very bones. The circlet calls to its own. Blood recognizes blood across the void between worlds, Peter jerked back from the water as if burned, the connection broken. He looked up at Eldrin with wide eyes. "Did you hear that?" The elf's expression was grim. "I heard nothing specific, but I sensed the veil's response to you." "What message did it convey?" Peter repeated the words, watching as Eldrin's ageless face grew even more troubled. "This confirms our gravest fears," the elf said after a moment of heavy silence. "Not only is someone seeking to reassemble the circlet of shadows, but there is a connection between that quest and your appearance in Alvendor." "But what does it mean? Blood recognizes blood?" Peter asked, a cold dread building in his stomach. Before Eldrin could answer, a new sound cut through the still air of the vale, a harsh, grating cry from above. Both looked up to see a large bird circling overhead, its wingspan impressive even at a distance. But as it banked in the sunlight, Peter could see that it was no ordinary bird. Its form was wrong, its movements too deliberate. "A foul bird," Eldrin said tensely, reaching for his bow. "A spy of the shadow. It has found us." The creature let out another cry, this one clearly a signal rather than a natural sound. From beyond the ridge to the east came an answering call, then another and another. "We are discovered," Eldrin said, stringing his bow with swift, practiced movements. "And I fear the bird does not hunt alone. Take up your weapons, Peter Hawthorne. Your training will now be tested in earnest." Peter fumbled for his own bow, his hands suddenly clumsy with fear. He had become reasonably proficient at hitting stationary targets under Eldrin's tutelage, but the prospect of actual combat sent waves of panic through him. The fell bird wheeled once more overhead, then dove toward them with startling speed. Eldrin's bow sang, and the creature tumbled from the sky with an arrow through its body, crashing into the tall grass outside the stone circle. But it was too late for secrecy. Over the ridge came the enemies that had answered the bird's call, a pack of what at first appeared to be wolves, but as they drew closer revealed themselves as something far worse. They were larger than natural wolves, with unnaturally long limbs and patchy, mangy fur that failed to cover skin mottled with growths like fungus. Most terrifying of all were their eyes, glowing with sickly yellow light and unmistakable malevolent intelligence. Shadow wolves, Eldrin said grimly, knocking another arrow. Corrupted by dark magic and bound to whoever now seeks the circlet. Stay behind me and shoot only when you have a clear target. Do not waste arrows. The pack charged up the slope toward the stone circle, moving with an eerie coordination that spoke of a single controlling will. Eldrin loosed arrow after arrow with devastating accuracy, each shot finding a vital spot. 3 of the creatures fell before they reached the standing stones, but at least a dozen more remained, now spreading out to encircle their position. Peter managed to knock an arrow, his hands shaking slightly as he drew the bowstring back. He aimed at the nearest shadow wolf, which had paused just outside the circle of standing stones, its lips pulled back to reveal yellowed fangs. He released, and to his surprise, the arrow struck true, burying itself in the creature's shoulder. It yelped, a sound too close to a human cry for comfort, but did not fall, instead backing away slightly, yellow eyes fixed on Peter with what now seemed like personal hatred. They cannot easily pass the stones, Eldrin said, tracking another wolf with his bow. The old magic still holds some power. But they will find a way in if we remain here too long. Even as he spoke, one of the larger wolves charged directly at a gap between 2 of the standing stones. As it passed through, there was a brief flash of blue light and a yelp of pain, but the creature pushed through, shaking its head as if dazed but still advancing. The wards weaken, Eldrin said sharply. We must prepare for close combat. He slung his bow over his shoulder and drew his long knife, which gleamed with a light of its own in the afternoon sun. Peter, seeing the shadow wolf he had wounded preparing for another charge, fumbled to draw his short sword. The weight of it felt wrong in his hand, nothing like the practice blades he had used at Ifilwan. The wounded wolf launched itself through the same gap its packmate had used, the blue flash noticeably dimmer this time. It came straight for Peter, perhaps recognizing him as the weaker opponent. Terror surged through him, but also something else, a desperate determination not to die in this strange world, so far from home. As the creature leaped, time seemed to slow. Peter raised his sword, bracing himself for the impact. At the last moment, instinct took over, and he stepped to the side while swinging the blade in an arc, a move Eldrin had drilled into him over countless practice sessions. The sword caught the shadow wolf mid-leap, opening a gash along its flank. The creature crashed to the ground, howling in pain but immediately scrambling to regain its footing. Before it could turn for another attack, Eldrin was there, his knife flashing down to end the beast's life with merciful speed. Well struck, the elf said tersely, already turning to face the next threat, 2 more shadow wolves that had pushed through the weakening barrier between the stones. But stay close. We fight as one. They stood back to back at the center of the circle, near the altar stone. The remaining shadow wolves now poured through the gaps between the standing stones, the barrier that had initially repelled them fading with each passage. Eldrin moved with fluid grace, his knife slicing through corrupted flesh as if it were parchment. Peter fought with less skill but growing confidence, managing to wound several attackers badly enough that Eldrin could finish them quickly. Despite their success, Peter knew they were in grave danger. For every shadow wolf they brought down, another seemed to take its place. And he was tiring rapidly, his arms growing heavy, his breath coming in gasps. Even Eldrin, with his elvish endurance, could not maintain this pace indefinitely. Just when it seemed they might be overwhelmed, a new sound cut through the snarls and growls of the shadow wolves, the clear, bright note of a horn, sounding from somewhere beyond the western edge of the ridge. The effect on the attacking creatures was immediate. They hesitated, several turning their heads toward the sound with what appeared to be alarm. The horn sounded again, closer now, accompanied by the thunder of hooves. Over the western edge of the ridge appeared riders, a dozen or more, mounted on horses that seemed to shine in the late afternoon sun. The lead rider raised a spear that gleamed with silver light, and at a signal, the mounted company charged directly at the pack of shadow wolves. The creatures broke formation, some turning to flee, others attempting to stand their ground. Those that resisted were swiftly dispatched by spear and sword, while the fleeing ones were pursued by riders who wielded bows from horseback with impressive skill. Within minutes, the battle had transformed from a desperate last stand to a decisive rout. The final shadow wolf fell with a silver-tipped spear through its body, its yellow eyes dimming to the dull color of old brass. The leader of the mounted company, the one who had sounded the horn, dismounted and approached the stone circle with a hand raised in greeting. As the figure drew closer, Peter saw with surprise that it was a young woman, perhaps no more than 20 years old, dressed in riding leathers with a light chainmail hauberk gleaming beneath a forest green cloak. Her hair, braided tightly against her head, was a striking auburn, and her eyes, when she looked directly at Peter, were a clear, piercing blue. "Well met, Aldrin of Athilwyn," she called in a voice strong and melodious. "Though I confess I did not expect to find the last lore master of the Western Woods engaged in battle with shadow wolves at the Sacred Circle." Aldrin inclined his head in greeting, sheathing his knife with a fluid motion. "Well met indeed, Mira of the Border Guard. Your arrival was most timely, and you have my gratitude." The young woman, Mira, turned her attention fully to Peter now, her gaze curious but not unfriendly. "And who is your companion?" "Not of elven kind, clearly, yet he fought with more courage than many I have seen." Peter, suddenly self-conscious of his disheveled appearance and the blood, black and viscous, that stained his borrowed sword, managed an awkward bow. "Peter Hawthorne," he said. "I'm not from around here." A flash of recognition crossed Myra's face, quickly masked. "Indeed," she said carefully. "There have been whispers of a stranger from beyond the veil. I see they were not merely tavern tales." She turned back to Eldrin. "The council will be most interested to hear of this." "The council?" Peter asked, looking between them. "The Council of Wardenship," Eldrin explained. "Representatives from both elvenkind and men who have maintained the vigil against the shadows since the breaking of the world, though their numbers have dwindled as memory faded." He gave Mira a measured look. "I had not planned to bring Peter before the council so soon in his training." Myra's expression grew serious. "Events may force your hand, Lore Master. The shadow wolves grow bolder by the day, venturing far from their lairs in the deep hollows. And they are not the only servants of darkness stirring in Alvendor." She gestured to the fallen creatures surrounding them. This was no random pack. They were hunting you, specifically, from the way they converged on this location. Eldrin nodded grimly. "I fear you are right. Our enemy, whoever they may be, has taken notice of Peter's arrival and seeks to prevent what they believe he represents." "Then you believe the prophecy speaks of him?" Mira asked, her voice lowered as if afraid of being overheard, though her companions were keeping a respectful distance, tending to their horses and ensuring no shadow wolves had survived. "The signs align too perfectly for coincidence," Eldrin replied. "And the Veil of Echoes has offered confirmation of a sort, though in riddles, as is its way." Mira studied Peter with renewed interest, a mixture of hope and doubt in her eyes. "He is very young," she observed. "By the reckoning of men, perhaps," Eldrin said with the ghost of a smile. "By mine, you are both children. Yet age is not the measure by which destiny chooses its instruments." The young woman seemed to reach a decision. "You must come with us to High Keek," she said. "It is the nearest outpost of the Border Guard, and safer than the open country with night approaching. The council has a representative there who should hear of these developments." Alvrin hesitated, then nodded. "That would be wise. The Ephyros of the Veil has been disturbed by the battle. We will learn nothing more here today." He turned to Peter. "Are you injured?" Peter took stock of himself, noting various minor cuts and what would surely develop into impressive bruises, but nothing serious. "I'm all right," he said. "Just shaken." "Your first true combat," Eldrin said with understanding. "You acquitted yourself well. Many with years more training have frozen in their first encounter with creatures of the shadow." "We have horses to spare," Mira said, gesturing toward her company. "Your wounds, minor though they may be, can be tended at High Keek. And there will be hot food and proper beds, luxuries I suspect you have not enjoyed on your journey." As if to emphasize the wisdom of accepting her offer, the sun chose that moment to dip below the western horizon, casting long shadows across the Veil of Echoes. The thought of spending the night in the open, with the bodies of shadow wolves surrounding them and the possibility of more enemies nearby, made Peter's decision easy. "High Keep sounds good to me," he said with feeling. Eldrin smiled slightly. Then to Highkeep we shall go. Though I warn you, Peter Hawthorne, you may find the curiosity of men more daunting than the fangs of shadow wolves. Your arrival has stirred much interest in Alvendor, and the tale of the stranger from beyond the veil has already spread farther than I would have wished. With these somewhat ominous words, they joined Myra's company. 2 riders dismounted to offer their horses to Peter and Eldrin, choosing to ride double with companions instead. As the sun's last rays faded from the sky and the twin moons began their nightly ascent, the party set off westward, leaving the Vale of Echoes and its slain shadow wolves behind, but carrying with them questions that still demanded answers, and dangers that had only begun to reveal themselves.